Welcome to Business Communications. Today we're going to be talking about Chapter 5, so writing preparation. There are a few components to the textbook today. So 5.1, we're going to learn how to think, then write. Writing preparation. 5.2, a planning checklist for business messages. 5.3, research and investigation, getting started. 5.4, we're going to talk about ethics, plagiarism, and reliable sources. 5.5, completing your research and investigation. And then lastly, 5.6, reading and analyzing. So learning objectives from Chapter 5. So at the end of this session, we're going to be able to explain why preparation is important in business writing. We're also going to be able to think critically and employ strategies to overcome common fears of writing, understand who, what, where, when, why, and how as features of writing purpose, describe the planning process and essential elements of a business document, compare and contrast ways of knowing your reading audience, and conduct research and investigation to gather information. We are also going to be able to understand how to be ethical, avoid plagiarism, and use reputable sources in your writing, demonstrate your ability to manage your time and successfully conduct research and investigation for a writing assignment, understand the difference or the different types of reading and analyzing that business documents encounter, and lastly, demonstrate how to write for skimming and for analytical reading in at least one written document of each kind. Okay, starting with a quote. Before you write, think. So since you were a child, you have learned to speak and write. This skill will continue to adapt across your lifetime, and simply being aware of this should encourage you to continuously look for opportunities to learn and improve your skill. The need for learning to produce clear and concise business writing may be a new skill for you. If you have struggled with writing in the past, this chapter will help you see the process from a perspective where attention to specific steps can lead to overall success. So, tip for success for you, so do not use the first search result listed on Google or Yahoo, whatever website or web browser you're using. When you are preparing to write a business document, you do not want to use the first source that is listed. This could leave you with a poorly written document, could be full of incorrect information, or perhaps just a narrow viewpoint. So instead, a better strategy would be to think about the purpose of your writing, then search for proper information, facts, and statistics that support your purpose. However, you also want to be on the lookout for information that could contradict or disprove the point that you were trying to make. So good research skills combined with effective preparation for writing involve a range of skills that require time and practice. The degree to which you practice and put effort in will pay off throughout your whole career. So along with this quote, in this chapter, we're going to be talking about preparing for writing. So before you write, think. Think about what you're going to need and prepare for that writing piece. So with the importance of preparation in mind, the question then becomes, how do we prepare ourselves for business writing? So there's no single correct answer, but here are some tips on how you can better prepare yourself for writing. So first, it is important to identify when you are the most productive. Is it during the day? Is it at night? In the evening? After a good cup of coffee? So before you begin writing, it's important to be alert and awake and ready to work. So knowing when you do your best work can help you get better prepared. Next, you want to be sure to focus your attention on your writing. It may help to choose an environment that is free of distractions. So perhaps you can work in a quiet office or even go to the library. Or that being said, if it works better for you, plug some headphones in and listen to music or listen to a podcast while you work or while you write. Depending on what type of work environment that you're in, it might not be possible to eliminate all distractions. There may be some unavoidable distractions, such as phones ringing or chatter, maybe, depending on where you are. So it's important to figure out what works best for you in these situations. So whether that's bringing along some earplugs with you or maybe having your headphones ready to use. It's important to note that no one strategy will work for everyone, so just do what best works for you. And lastly, it's important to think. So as mentioned before, it's important to think about the purpose of your writing and plan your time accordingly. It's important to do your research and understand what your purpose is. But that being said, no matter how much you plan and prepare to write, it is important to note that you do not need to be in the right mood to write. Sometimes we must force ourselves to do the work, even if we're not in our most productive or distraction-free state. If we wait until we are in the right mood to write, then we risk never getting started at all. So next, let's talk about thinking critically. When we are preparing to start our writing project, it's also important to practice the skill of thinking critically. So thinking critically can be defined as the self-directed, self-disciplined, self-monitored, and self-corrective thinking. It is the difference between watching a movie in a daze versus analyzing a movie with intention to its use of lighting, camera angles, music, and then thinking about how they are used to influence that audience. So one activity requires little mental effort, while the other requires attention to detail and the ability to compare and contrast. So to think critically about that scenario. So critical thinking generally requires the use of communication, problem solving, attention to detail, and self-awareness skills. We must be willing to acknowledge and address our own tendency for confirmation bias, egocentrism, and sociocentrism. So as we discussed getting into the right frame of mind for writing, the same recommendation applies to reading and research. So if we only pay attention to the information that reinforces our writing purpose or our existing beliefs and ignore the information that contradicts these, then we are guilty of confirmation bias. So as you read, research, and prepare for writing, make an effort to gather information from a range of reliable sources, even if this information leads to conclusions that aren't in line with your beliefs. Next, so egocentrism and sociocentrism are related concepts to that confirmation bias. Egocentrism is the use of self-centered standards to determine what to believe and what to reject. So similarly, sociocentrism involves the use of society-centered standards to determine what to believe or what to reject. So one is about ourself, that's our egocentrism, and then one is about society, so that's our sociocentrism. Both ways of thinking can create an us versus them viewpoint or relationship, which could undermine your credibility and push readers away who do not share your same viewpoint. So you have to be very, very careful about those two. So all of these factors can lead to confirmation bias and groupthink, which can result in false conclusions with little or no factual support behind a belief. So if a person believes that the earth is flat and never questions that belief, it serves as an example of egocentric thinking. So them themselves are thinking that that's a standard. The person believes this is true even though they have never questioned why they believe this. So if the person decides to look for information but only finds the information that supports their pre-existing belief, ignoring information that contradicts that belief, then they are then guilty of that confirmation bias. So they are only acknowledging the information that is in line with them believing that the earth is flat. And then if they believe that the earth is flat because everyone in their group or their community believes it, even though they themselves have never questioned or confirmed the belief, then they are guilty of sociocentrism. So in each of these cases, the false thinking strategy leads to poor conclusions. So having a positive attitude about writing in general and your effort is a key component to your writing success. If you approach a writing assignment with uncertainty and fear, you will spend your valuable time and attention in ways that do not contribute positively to your writing. So people often fear the writing process because of three main reasons. That could be because of a negative orientation, a risk of failure, and potentially a fear of the unknown. So negative orientations is when the writer has a pre-existing negative association or view with the task or the activity. So for some writers, previous experiences have led to a pre-existing association with writing. That could be a positive association if they have been encouraged, coached, affirmed, or rewarded as they demonstrated measurable gain or demonstrated good writing or good behavior. That association could also be negative if efforts have been met with maybe discouraging feedback or a lack of affirmation or negative reinforcement. Effective business writing is a highly valued skill, and regardless of the degree to which writing will be a significant aspect of your designated job duties, your ability to do well will be a boost to your career. So if you have a negative orientation already towards writing, admitting that is an important first step. So recognizing that negative orientation is an important first step in overcoming the fear of writing. So when we think about risk of failure, it's a given that we don't want to fail. We do not want to fail at anything we do. We want to succeed. So risk of failure is a common fear, especially across public speaking, and in some writing situations as well. So producing predictable behavioral patterns we can recognize, address, and resolve. In public speaking, our minds may go blank at the start of a presentation as we confront our fear of failure. And in writing, we may experience a form of blankness, often referred to as writer's block. The overwhelming feeling of not knowing what to write or where to even start. So that could look like us sitting helplessly, waiting for a situation to change. But we have the power to change our circumstances and to overcome our risk of failure. You may be familiar with the concept of a rough draft. It may compete in your mind with a desire for perfection. So it's important to note that writing is a very dynamic process, and it is a reflection of the communication process itself. So it won't be perfect the first time you attempt it. Awareness that your rough draft serves as a purpose but does not represent your final product should serve in the same way like a rehearsal would be for a speech or a speaker. So you get a second or third chance to get it right. So having that draft is a really important tool to reduce your fear of failure and let go potentially of your perfectionist tendencies. Your desire for perfection will serve you well when it comes to editing that final draft or polishing your final document, but everything has a time and a place. So if you start with your rough draft and then put more effort into your final draft to prepare it for that final run through and that final edit and get it just really, really perfect. So learning where and when to place your effort is also a part of writing preparation. And then lastly, we often fear the unknown. So it's part of being human and is reflected across all contexts. So that includes public speaking and writing. If you have never given a speech before, your first time on stage can be quite an ordeal. If you have a written formal business report, your fear of the unknown is understandable. You've never done it before. So how can you address this fear? One simple solution to that is to make the unknown known. If we take the mystery out of the process and the product, we can see it for its essential components, its organizational pattern, and start to see how our product may look before we even start to produce it. So in many organizations, you can ask your supervisor or your coworkers for copies of similar documents to the ones that you have been assigned, even if the content is different. So starting with that template might help you have a starting point to go further with this. So if this is not an option, if you can't get a template, simply consider the way most documents in your company are written. Maybe there's a standard template that people use or a standard form that people use. This could be something even as basic as an inter-office email. So if there's a certain way that your business wants you to write an email, you can just copy something that you already have access to. So your goal is to become familiar with the type of document and to examine several successful examples out of that. So once you see a couple of reports, you will have a better feel for what you have to produce, and the unknown will be far less mysterious. So study any documentation that you can and just look at how it's formatted, how it's structured, and try to incorporate that into your own work. Okay, so let's do a quick activity. So take a few moments to think about one aspect of your writing that you would like to improve and why. So if you are studying this chapter with a friend, I encourage you to discuss your answers. So feel free to pause the video now and jot down a few notes. Okay, so next let's talk about a planning checklist for business messages. So preparation for the writing process involves purpose, research and investigation, reading and analyzing, and adaptation. So while you may be free to create documents that represent yourself or your organization, your employer will often have direct input into their purpose. So all acts of communication have general and specific purposes, and the degree to which you can identify these purposes will influence how effective your writing is. So general purposes involve the overall goal of the communication interaction. So to inform, persuade, entertain, facilitate interaction, or motivate a reader. The general purpose influences the presentation and expectation for feedback. In an informative message, which is the most common type in business writing, you will need to cover several predictable elements. So the who, what, when, where, how, and why. Note that last item, the why, is designated as optional, so it's not going to show up all the time. This is because business writing sometimes needs to report facts and data objectively without making any interpretation or pointing to any cause-effect relationships. In other business situations, of course, identifying why something happened or why a certain decision is advantageous will be the essence of communication. So that why is important. In addition to its general purpose, either to maybe inform, persuade, entertain, or motivate, every piece of writing also has at least one specific purpose, which is the intended outcome. So the result that will happen once your written communication has been read. Now let's talk a little bit about credibility, timing, and audience. That covers the next few points here. Credibility, or the perception of integrity of the message based on an association with the source, is central to any communication act. If your audience perceives your message as having presented the information in an impartial and objective way, they will be likely to accept your information as accurate. If, however, your audience does not associate trust and reliability with your message, you should anticipate that they will have many questions, or they may just be closed off to your message altogether. Timing is another important factor to consider here. So you may just want to get your message out as soon as possible, but perhaps it's not the right time for your audience. So an example of that is you probably would not want to send out a message around a certain holiday, as people may be on vacation or they may be busy with other things and your message may not get the attention that it deserves. So just being mindful of that timing for your audience. So next, it's important to take every precaution to ensure that your message reflects positively on your business or on your employer. So here it's important to also be mindful of tone in those situations. And then the next 3 items after that in the list are all associated with audience profile. So understanding your audience size, composition, and knowledge will help you create an effective message to your audience, which will help create audience engagement. So you want that message to be specific to your target audience. So given what you find out about your audience, you will be able to choose the correct communication channel for them as well. So for example, if you're sending out a message to residents in a small town, maybe they don't all have access to reliable internet, it probably would not make sense to use email as your communication channel. You would probably want to look at mailing a letter to all of those residents, as it could be more reliable and a more efficient way to reach everyone. So it is expected that with any sort of communication, you will receive a response. Anticipating probable responses will help you prepare to answer those responses or questions, and will also further boost your credibility. So if you are a subject matter expert and you prepare for what questions you might have or what responses you might have and are able to give people accurate information right off the bat, it'll help boost your credibility with them. And then lastly, it is also important to make sure that the information that you provide in your message is accurate, ethical, and pertinent. So let's look at some advantages and disadvantages to written communication channels. So this is table 5.1 in your textbook. So the first channel let's look at is instant messaging or text message. So strengths, it's very fast, it's good for rapid exchanges of small amounts of information, and it's not very expensive. Now on the flip side, weaknesses, it is more informal. It might not be suitable for large amounts of information, and then there could also be abbreviations or slang in those messages, which could lead to misunderstandings or be difficult for some people to understand. Now the expectation with a text message or an IM, an instant message, is that you get a quick response. So you probably would want to choose this channel, a text message or an instant message, when you're using it informally among your peers with similar levels within your organization. So maybe it's your coworkers you're messaging or text messaging back and forth, or it's also appropriate too when you need a fast, inexpensive connection with a colleague over a small issue with a limited amount of information. Next is email. So email can be really good because it's fast, it's good for fast exchanges of information. You can use the subject line for a very brief introduction about your message. You can also distribute it to multiple recipients, and it also is inexpensive. The other advantage to having an email is that you then see a chain of emails about the same topic. However, weaknesses of email is you may hit send prematurely and not be finished writing your message, or maybe you wanted to add a little bit more to that. Your email could be overlooked or deleted without being read, depending on what the subject line says. It's very common for people to reply all to a mass email, and then you get a lot of reply alls and a lot of emails following that, which clogs up people's inboxes. You could accidentally forward a message to someone who didn't need the message or it wasn't intended on the original sender list, and then large attachments may cause the email to be caught in the spam filter. So sometimes emails aren't received. So the expectation with an email is that normally a response is expected within 24 hours although norms vary by situation and organizational culture. So when to choose an email, so it would be appropriate when you need to communicate, but time is not the most important consideration. Maybe you have a couple days to respond to an email, doesn't need to be instant. Or like if you need to send attachments, whether it's a Word document or a PDF or whatever that may be, and just provided that the file size is not too big. So faxes. Fax is another common communication channel that is used. Maybe not so much anymore. That technology is changing a little bit now. A lot of it you can actually send faxes online, which is a new concept for some people. It's fast, it provides documentation, so you have that paper trail. However, weaknesses to that, there could be some receiving issues. Maybe the machine ran out of paper or toner, it's not printing properly, or it didn't receive properly. Long distance phone charges could apply, so it could get quite expensive. And then the transitional phone-based technology is losing popularity to online information exchange. Like I was mentioning, this platform does seem to be moving more and more online. So the expectation with a fax is that it's normally a long message, so a multiple page document. So it's easier to send it over fax rather than doing an email. So you probably would want to choose a fax when you want to send a document whose format must remain intact as presented. So maybe it's a medical prescription or signed work order, or it allows the use of a letterhead to represent your company. Okay, so next let's talk about memos. So memos are still official, but a little bit less formal than a letter. And they clearly show who sent it, when, and to whom. So you can see it's almost a more formal version of an email sometimes. Weaknesses to memos is that memos can get sent through email. People generally, they delete them depending on what the subject line says. Some people don't read them. Attachments could also get removed by those spam filters. So memos are normally used internally in an organization to communicate directives from management on policy and procedure or other documentation. So memos are very much an internal use of an internal communication channel. You sometimes see them go externally, but most of the time it's internal to your staff. And then when to choose a memo. So you would choose a memo when you need to communicate a general message within an organization. Next, let's talk about letters. So these would be printed letters. It's more formal. You can use a letterhead that displays what company you work for and could add credibility. However, weaknesses that it could get filed away or thrown away, not really read, could get shredded too, depending on what the situation is. And it costs time and money in terms of printing, stuffing the envelopes, sealing the envelopes, postage, and then also too, it could take a while to get to your recipient depending on what your situation is. So the expectation with a letter is that specific formats associated with specific purposes. And then you would choose a letter if you need to inform, persuade, deliver bad news, or maybe a negative message, and document the communication. So next we have a report. So it's good when you have significant time for preparation and production. Maybe you're looking for a more formal report and you have a lot of time to put it together. This requires extensive research and documentation. And then also the expectation with that is that it is a specific format for a specific purpose, and then reports are generally used to inform. And then you would use this when you need to document the relationship between large amounts of data to inform an internal or external audience. And lastly, we have proposal. So proposals generally are a little bit different than reports. They still require a significant amount of time to prepare. And then it's also, again, extensive research and documentation is put into a proposal. And then same thing with as reports, so you're looking at a specific format for a specific purpose. Generally, proposals are used to persuade rather than inform. And you'd use these, again, if you were needing to persuade an audience with complex arguments and data. So conducting research and investigations. So clearly not every piece of business writing requires research or investigation, but if you receive an email asking for the correct spelling of your boss's name and perhaps her official job title, then you would probably be able to answer that without having to look anything up or without having to research it. But what happens if the sender of the email wants to know who in your company is the decision maker for purchasing a certain supply item? Unless you work for a very small company, you will likely have to look through the organizational chart and possibly make a phone call or two before you're able to write an email answering this question. So in that example, you've just done the research for a piece of business writing. You did the research to respond to an email. Even if you need to write something much more complex than an email, such as a report or a proposal, research does not have to be about long hours at a library. Instead, it could be consulting with business colleagues who have written similar documents, asking them what worked, what didn't work, and what was well received by management and the target audience. So once given an assignment topic, you know your general and specific purposes and have a good idea of your reader's expectations, it's then time to gather information. So your best sources may be all around you, so it's probably within your business and your organization internally. Information may come from reports from the marketing department or even from a trusted and well-versed colleague, but you still need to do your homework. After you have written several similar documents for your organization, you may have your collection of sample documents, but don't be tempted to take shortcuts and repurpose existing documents just to meet a tight deadline. You want to make sure that you have lots of time to work on these. Creating an original work specifically tailored to the issue and the audience at hand is the best approach to establish that credibility, produce a more effective document, and make sure that no important aspect of your topic is left out. So allow yourself that time to do to go the extra mile and put in that extra work to make it look more professional and boost your credibility. Once you develop an idea for your topic, you may still have quite a broad subject that will be a challenge to cover within the allotted time before that deadline. You may want to revisit your topic and then narrow it down to ensure that your topic is specific. Having a narrow topic will help you focus on your key points. Highlighting your key points and sticking to your main message will help keep your audience's attention and minimize confusion or misunderstandings. And then once you know your topic and key points, you can then start planning to investigate for further information. So this includes deciding where you will look for the required information. Old documents, articles, coworkers, or other internal documents are a really, really good starting point. So that being said too, the intranet would also be a good external resource for you to use. And then lastly, staying organized throughout your whole process will be key to keeping your key points straight. If you use the internet as a resource, it's important to keep your information organized and filter out any excess information that is not in line with your topic. And keep a list of websites that you have used as sources so that you can properly cite the information that you use. So before we wrap up here, I just want to talk a little bit about ethics, plagiarism, and reliable sources. So unlike writing for personal or academic purposes, Your business writing will help determine how well your performance is evaluated in your job. So whether you are writing for colleagues within your workplace or outside vendors or customers, you will want to build a solid, well-earned, favorable reputation for yourself and your writing. So your goal is to maintain and enhance your credibility and that of the organization at all times. Credibility is really, really big in business, especially in business writing. So you want to make sure that you start your investigation so that you always question the credibility of the information that you're finding or that you're being provided. Sources may have no reviews by peers or editors, and the information could be misleading, could be biased, or could be false. So if you don't see any reviews on that, that is a red flag that it might not be good information or proper information, could be misleading. So you just want to make sure that you're being a very wise information consumer and you're monitoring the information and questioning the information that you have coming in. So many employers have a corporate code of ethics. Even if your employer does not, it goes without saying that there are laws governing how the company can and cannot conduct business. Some of these laws apply to business writing. So as an example, it would not only be unethical, but also illegal to send out a promotional letter announcing a special sale on an item that originally costs maybe $500 and then offering it for $100, if in fact you maybe only have one of these items in inventory. So when a retailer does this, the unannounced purpose of the letter is to draw customers into the store, apologize for running out of the sale item, and urge them to buy a similar item for $400. So this is known as bait and switch, and this is a form of fraud and is actually punishable by law. So whether the material is a photograph, text, a chart or graph, or any other form of media, taking someone else's work and representing it as your own is plagiarism. Plagiarism is committed whether you copy material verbatim, paraphrase its wording, or even merely take its ideas. If you do any of these things without giving credit to the source, it is plagiarism. This does not mean that you're forbidden to quote from your sources. It's entirely likely that in the course of your research, you may find a perfect turn, a phrase, or a way of communicating ideas that fits your needs perfectly. So using it in your own writing is fine, as long as you credit the source fully enough that your readers can find it on their own. That is really key. You can use other people's work as long as you give them credit for it. And as you can see, the picture on the left of the slide stating that your ideas came from your own mind when indeed you got them from somewhere else is plagiarism and is not acceptable. And then one thing to be mindful of too is if you are using the internet for your research, it's important that you evaluate your sources for their reliability. So I mentioned this a little bit previously. One aspect of internet research that cannot be emphasized enough is the abundance of online information that is incomplete, outdated, misleading, or just downright false. Anyone can put up a website. Once it's up, the owner may or may not enter updates or corrections on a regular basis. Anyone can write a blog on any subject, whether or not the person actually has expertise on that subject. And anyone who wishes to contribute to Wikipedia article can do so, although Wikipedia postings are moderated by editors who have to register and submit their qualifications. It's always important to look beyond the surface of a site to access who sponsors it, where the information displayed came from, and whether the owner has a certain agenda. So in general, documents that represent quality reasoning have the following traits. So generally they have a clearly articulated purpose and goal, a question, problem, or issue to address, information, data, and evidence that is clearly relevant to the stated purpose and goals, inferences or interpretations that lead to conclusions based on the presented information, data, and evidence, a frame of reference or point of view that is clearly articulated, And then lastly, assumptions, concepts, and ideas that are clearly articulated. So if you find an article with all of those points, and of course those points are covered in these slides in the notes section, or also in your textbook, that is the sign of a good, reliable source. So completing your research and investigation. Once you become immersed in your sources, it can be easy to get carried away in the pursuit of information and lose sight of why you were doing all this research and investigation. As a responsible writer, you will need to plan not only how you will begin your information gathering, but also how you will bring it to a conclusion. Given the limited time for research involved in most business writing, how can you make the most of your information gathering efforts? Part of learning to write effectively involves learning to read quickly and efficiently while conducting research. You are not required to read each word, and if you did, you would slow yourself down greatly. At the same time, if you routinely skip large sections of print and only focus on the bulleted lists, you may miss valuable examples that could inspire you in your writing. So how can you tell when to skim and when to pay attention to detail? One strategy is to look for abstracts or brief summaries of information before you commit time to reading an article all the way through. So look for indexes to identify key terms you might want to cover before eliminating them as you narrow your topic. It is smart to make a list of sources as you search. You may also want to bookmark pages with your web browser if you want to revisit them later. So next, after you've done that research and investigation and you've managed your time, you would compile your information. So compiling involves composing your documents out of materials from other documents or sources. This process has 7 major steps. So sensitivity, exposure, assimilation and accommodation, incubation, incorporation, production, and revision. So let's talk about the first one, sensitivity. Sensitivity refers to your capacity to respond to stimulation. So that's being excited, responsive, or susceptible to new information. This starts with a self-inventory of your current or past interests and activities. If you are intrigued by a topic or area of interest, your enthusiasm will carry through to your document and make it more stimulating for your reading audience. So the next one is exposure. So exposure involves your condition of being presented views, ideas, or experiences made known to you through direct experience. If you were going to select a topic on flying, but you have never flown before, your level of exposure may be low. Your level of awareness may be high. However, in terms of the importance of security on airplanes, after reading about, watching television on, or maybe hearing about stories on the radio or on the TV, you may decide to expose yourself to more information through a range of sources as you investigate the topic of airline security. Assimilation and accommodation is what we're going to talk about next. So these two refer to the process by which you assimilate or integrate new ideas into your thinking patterns and accommodate or adapt, filter out new resources of information as they relate to your goal. So you may have preconceived notions or ideas about airline security before you began your investigation, but new information has changed the way you view your topic. So you might also find issues like maybe, for example, the right to privacy that may be points of conflict with your beliefs as you review information. So this stage is important to the overall process of developing your topic, and it takes time. You need to be able to contemplate, review, and reflect on how the new information fits or falls to connect clearly to your chosen topic. Next is incubation, which is the process by which you cause an idea or ideas to develop in your mind. This might not happen all at once, and you might spend time thinking about the new information, directions, or ways you might develop or focus your topic. Next is incorporation, which refers to the process by which you bring the information into a whole or complete topic. So now you are incorporating all of the ideas that you have pulled together and bringing them into one topic. By now you have investigated, chosen information over others, and have started to see how the pieces will come together for your writing. And then one of the most important steps is production, which is the act of putting everything together, creating your document from the elements that you have gathered. You may start to consider what comes first, what goes last, and how you will link your ideas and examples together. So this is actually putting everything together, putting your document together. So lastly, the last step here is revision. So revision is the process by which you look over again in order to correct or improve your message. So you will notice elements that need further investigation, development, or additional examples and visual aids as you produce your documents. This is an important step to the overall production of your message, much like revising an essay for an English course. So this is your time to catch all of your spelling mistakes and all of your errors and produce that final document for you to hand in. And then once you have gathered what you think is enough material, or maybe your eyes begin to glaze over, take a step back and return to the general and specific purpose of the document that you had set out to write. You want to look again at the basic elements, like the who, what, when, where, and perhaps why, and fill in the answers based on what you have found. It's not unusual at this stage to have some holes in the information that you have collected, and you probably need more research to fill those holes or fill those gaps. You may also realize that your research findings have disproved part or even all of your original agenda, which might make it necessary for you to change your message significantly. So just make sure you allow yourself lots of time for this piece as well, so that you can go back to the basics if you need to and redo what you're saying based on the research that you have done. Okay, so lastly, let's talk about reading and analyzing. So when you read, do you read each and every word? Do you skim over the document and try to identify key terms and themes? Or do you focus on numbers and statistics? Or ignore the text and go straight to the pictures or maybe the videos? Because people read in many diverse ways, you as a writer will want to consider how your audience may read and analyze your document. For a longer piece of writing, such as a report or a proposal, here are some techniques that you can use to help the reader grasp key points. So presenting a quick overview or an executive summary at the beginning of the document, using bold-face headings as signposts for the main sections and their subsections, and then where possible, make your headings informative. So for example, a heading like "Problem began in 1992" is more informative than one that just says background. And also within each section, begin each paragraph with a topic sentence that indicates what the paragraph discusses. Another tip here is when you have a list of points, questions, or considerations, format them with bullets rather than listing them in sentences. And then lastly, the bottom line. The bottom line is generally understood to mean the total cost of a given expenditure or project, but can also refer to the conclusions that the information in the report leads to. So as the expression, the bottom line, indicates, these conclusions should be clearly presented at the end of the document, which is the place where the time-pressed reader will often turn immediately after reading the first page. So with this, we conclude Chapter 5, but I do encourage you to read through your textbook to reinforce the concepts that we have covered here today. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me at any time.